Thank you. So I'm going to just start with a general question for everyone, and it is what your personal interest or connection was to each of these stories. Actually, maybe I'll start with you, and then we'll come this way.
Well, I shot my film in my hometown, and everyone I cast is from my community, and so in a lot of ways, just everything just is really related to my everyday life at home, I guess, and what's around me. Like in Cape Breton, there's a pretty big methadone dependency and opiate dependency problem. So yeah, in a very general sense, the material was something that felt really close to me. And yeah, I started actually writing it. I saw a young couple in my community go door to door with a lawnmower, and that sort of intrigued me. But what made me actually really start to write it was I thought about casting a friend of mine who wasn't an actor in the role, and when I thought of that, I just the character just started coming out because I just heard his voice in the role, and I thought he would relate to the subject matter a lot because he struggled with drug addiction, mental illness, and a few months into writing it, he ended up committing suicide, and I sort of had to stop working on it for a few months, but I sort of knew, I was like, I need to tell this story now. It became really personal then, and so yeah, the character Blaze is felt very much related to this person I know, and then the character of Nessa ended up becoming personal because I ended up putting a lot of myself into that, and and I think when you're working on a project for so long, I think the longer you work on it, I think the more of yourself you end up putting into it without even realizing it. So I know that at the end of the filmmaking process, in the sound edit room, when I watched the film, I was like, oh, I made a film about me. And I wasn't thinking I was doing that. It's sort of a subconscious thing. But so yeah, there's lots of personal layers there.
And in the development process, did you find, because you were exploring something so close to you and that was so personal, given it was about a friend and then he died, what were some of the challenges of that? And were there any points at which you had to kind of, either walk away, or you mentioned that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the challenge, I guess, is if I felt like I was basing it on a real person, I think that would have been really complicated for me. My friend actually was always like, you should make a film about me. And he had a twin brother who a year later committed suicide. And he was like, you should make a film about me and my brother before someone else does. Get to the story first. And I was just like, no, I'm going to make a film about these characters and I'm going to cast you in it. I think what felt complicated is if I did actually try to represent a real person on screen, but because I felt like I was writing a character and just putting him in it, that gave me some more freedom to relax and feel like I could explore it without taking on the responsibility of representing a real person. But at the same time, I think I was always sort of negotiating that throughout the process, and yeah, I think even though I take so much from real life, I think I do it in such a spread out way that I feel that I don't have the responsibility to be. I take the creative license to do what I need to do, and without being too anxious about it.
Great.
Yeah, for me, I was actually working on another film in China at the time, and I had a lot of problems getting financing for it. So I was feeling a lot of let's say frustration and angst towards the way things were done. So then rather than being stuck, so we wanted to we took another story that I had written for another setting, actually for the States, and we rewrote it for a smaller town, a smaller place away from bigger cities where we can control the budget. With it was actually in my producer's town, and so we were able to do the film very quickly. And then it's funny, when you start making it, then slowly you draw the story closer to yourself. And I guess for me, it was it was kind of just to remind myself what I could potentially become. Like it was, the story's it's a society where it's pretty harsh. So I think that like we're all, I feel myself being a little bit desensitized to sort of help people and things like that. So I sort of made a story to number one, to release sort of a lot of the angst that I was having at the time, and also just to breaking free.
Right.
Yeah, and to sort of remind myself. Now I look back at the film, I'm like, oh yeah, so if I ever feel that I'm sort of straying too far that way, I could watch the film, and that would scare the heck out of me. So yeah, I caught myself there.
Great. Terril?
Hello. The film started, I was commissioned to do a project for Imaginative for their storytelling series, and it got me thinking about what was story, what were our histories, and my personal connection to this piece. My ex-husband's stepfather was, or he was Icelandic, and his field of study was oral storytelling, and how their culture values oral storytelling. And I'm mixed. I'm Métis and Native, and white. Sorry, Métis and white, just to be clear. And I'm always looking at my own personal story, at my history as it's been told to me by my grandfather's sister, and sleuthing my way around colonial texts and trying to find out what the truth is between those two things. And realizing that a lot of the histories that I'm reading are very biased. And I know that because I can compare them to my oral stories. And so when it comes to trying to figure out who you are through other people's sense of history, SNIP cuts up those histories and indigenizes them, and ultimately that's what I try to do in my own life and my own work, trying to figure out through a biased narrative who I am. And so I guess that was my connection to the story. And I'm an animator, which means I am all the characters in my piece, that I take on their personalities and understand them and work through them. And they're all, I don't know, I have a lot to say. I don't know how much you want me to say. So I'm very...
You really develop relationships to these little built characters that are stop motion.
I'm also them. They have to perform and act, and I become their soul. So it takes a while pushing something around until it actually comes to life, and then it starts surprising me too. But I do have to understand beyond the choreography of the movement what they're feeling or what their intentions are. Absolutely. So I lived, with them for like 8 months. So it was a very long time, a very long process.
And what's the final running time for 8 months?
15 minutes.
Okay.
My feature took 5 years, so yeah, it takes a long time.
Sure. Tyrone?
Mariner came about, my connection to Mariner came from my actual experience going to college for marine navigation. It was something I did about a year before I decided to take on filmmaking. And it was a period of my life that was eventful, but was something that I kind of had tucked away. I didn't really speak about it. And when we went to, I had an opportunity to pitch for another short film, and I was trying to come up with a really cool idea, something that would be cool to shoot.
Tyrone, can I ask who you were pitching to?
We're pitching to the people that we got the grant from NBC Universal, who gave most of the money to make the film. And we were thinking, I was trying to think of something cool to do for them, and my friend was just like, why don't you do that whole something about why don't you just tell the story about when you went to college? And I was like, no one wants to see that, it's because it's to me it was normal, but to a lot of people, as I've learned, it's a weird thing, being a sailor or going to school for trying to be a sailor. That's something that most people don't go to school for, and so I thought about it and I didn't want to do it, but in the moment you find that braveness and or you let go of that fear and you decide to all right, let's go for it. Let's tell this story. And luckily they went for it, and it became a process of about 6 or 7 months diving back into that world, going back to the city, up to Owen Sound, up to the college, and reshooting all these moments that I experienced and I disliked and felt very uncomfortable with, and here I was trying to recapture it with actors. And
Yeah, there's a great scene where everyone has to jump into the pool in these really tight, suffocating outfits, and you build unbelievable tension in that scene.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, it's something that, you know, seeing the actors do something that we experienced as students. You know, when we did those survival training courses, there's no way to prepare anybody to do any of the things that you get to do during college. You just put on the suits and you get in the water. So it was interesting putting the actors through the same process. And Thomas Olajide, who plays, I guess, a fictionalized version of myself in the film, did a great job of learning things that took me a year. It took most people a year to really pick up. He learned over the course of 3 weeks and was brilliant at it. So, yeah, it pretty much just came out of my desire or this moment of being able to tell this personal story about a time in my life that I wanted to stay away from, but ultimately was able to face and put on screen for everybody.
Great. And I want to just go back to pitching for a second, because I think because we have such a robust Arts Council system in Canada, often short filmmakers don't have to pitch their projects, they just write a grant for it. You had to pitch your project. What was that like? And after the pitch, did you come out thinking, oh yeah, I did a good job, that was successful? Or like, how did you feel about it?
Pitching is, I feel like you're always constantly pitching. Especially like when you meet people and they ask you what you're up to. I mean, you're always doing that. The only difference is that when you're in a room and there's people there, you're just doing it to them in like more formally as opposed to like informally, like you do at events or in the street. I mean, for me personally, I think the best thing to do is just to be excited about the project and to, I mean, if you're excited about the project, it's a lot easier for other people to get excited about the project. And so that was like the first step of before going into pitching was coming to that core of being like, okay, I want to do this. What's the amazing thing that what's the story that I want to tell? And then once you find that story that you want to tell, it's very easy then to relay that to other people. And if you're excited about it, then they're excited about it. But it is definitely a bit of there was still a document process of actually creating a grant document that still had to be made. But I actually, I mean, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I actually prefer the idea of actually speaking to somebody and being able to gauge maybe their reaction or the room right away, as opposed to like sending off this document into space and waiting 3 months to see how because you have no idea what anybody thinks of it or what the conversation is. Like when you're in the room with somebody, they're able to.
That's amazing. I think a lot of people would find that nerve-wracking, but that's great.
I find that nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Johnny, did you have to pitch?
Yeah, many times unsuccessfully, you know, and it's yeah, I mean, it was just, you know, in the States and in China, it's very, you know, there's no public funding at all. You know, in China these days, it's, you know, the first couple of questions that they ask you, they're trying to gauge if this is going to be a commercial film or an art house film, you know, and those are sort of terrible. When you kind of figure out that's what they're looking for, then it's hard to keep going with your story because that's not what they're interested in. Then you know they're looking for who potentially could play the role as a star, or which genres of it does it fit in, like in terms of what it reminds them of, you know, films in the past that have been successful. So that's tricky. It's funny. I was just reminded of a story that James Schamus would tell of Ang Lee pitching to him the first time when they met, and he said it was like the worst pitch that's ever like he's ever seen. You know, but because. Yeah, and I guess there was something about the enthusiasm, you know, that he brought to it. It was like there's something there, you know, and plus Ang Lee actually brought the money to James Schamus, so there was no, he did. It was like an easy call, but yeah, I had this experience where like I remember like, in front of some of these investors, I could be juggling balls, and they wouldn't pay attention to me. Like I could say anything and they just wouldn't care. But then like when somebody of an importance says, look at, he's like, that guy, he's got something, like that. Just one word like that, all of a sudden they hand over a check, So I've gotten used to just kind of like, picking my fights now. So it's sometimes there's no rules but pitch. So it's about getting sometimes the right pieces together and having all the stars align, I think.
And did you find some of those, did you find some of that process a little demoralizing throughout, or how did you stay motivated?
Yeah, I think that I found it completely demoralizing. And then so I put it into a film, in some way. So it's, but then, now I just think that it's all a game and it's all a process. So, the harder you push, then it does get a little easier, I think. So I find that now it's like, most of the people that I'm pitching to, we spend the first 30 minutes, just talking, and if there's alcohol involved, it's always better. And then usually they're just like they just want to find something to work together, to have this sort of collaboration, and that's always much easier than having to sort of, kind of pitch them an idea, show them these sort of market research, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And Johnny, since you have the mic, I'm going to ask you a question about writing, because you've made short films in Brazil, US, Australia. Grand Canal and this film are now in China, which is your birthplace and where you spent your life until you were 10. What do you think of the old saying, write what you know?
Yeah, I believe it very much, because I think that every one of those films, like all those films were sort of, the ones you mentioned before, when I was kind of sort of going around, I was sort of searching for sort of how to tell my story. And in Brazil and Australia, I think I really found sort of how I like to tell those stories. And then it's always a good idea to kind of have a little bit of removed sort of, from the actual stories, because sometimes that gives you more ways to be creative and with the actual subject. Actually, it was like I was very surprised when Quentin Tarantino, like he was in like one of these panels, and he said that all of his films are like all personal stories, and I'm like, I don't get it, But then I realized that, I mean, that's what he does, he puts it into a genre, and then all of a sudden you can't see it anymore. But because the through line of what he tries to tell is always something that he wants to sort of personally, tell to the audience, then you could, sometimes you just feel it, So I think that in China, I think those last two films, all my films, they're all about something that hopefully I'm trying to answer for myself, and so I hope to, I certainly hope to sort of not to be just settled in China making films, because it is very difficult, and I feel like I get old pretty fast over there. And so, but I'd like to try to make films in other places, and now actually I'm getting better scripts. It's kind of funny, because once you do better over there, then all of a sudden you get better scripts in the States. So I feel like I'm starting to find things that I can sink my teeth into also in North America also.
Great. Ashley, I want to ask you about casting and working with your two leads, which you mentioned were non-actors, and what that was like, and sort of why you made that choice, and also maybe how it was different from working with actors for you.
Yeah, for me, I think as a director, I think casting is like one of the most important decisions you can make. It's like the majority of your work, I think, as a director, is just choosing the right person.
So you do endorse the saying that casting is 90%?
90%.
Yeah, okay.
Those foremen, said that? Yeah, totally, I do. So yeah, I actually think casting, auditioning is like the most intensive part of the whole process for me, and the one I put a lot of time into, and gets very complicated because I often do cast non-professional actors. So I'll just like I remember with Werewolf, I was at the library and I saw this teenage girl, and I was like, she's Nessa, and you know, so I went up to her, and I'm just always approaching people like in Tim Hortons and libraries and sidewalk, and and which can be uncomfortable, but I don't know. I just don't really worry about it now. But then I get to know these people and develop a relationship and explore the possibility of whether they could actually play the role when they don't have any experience doing that. And also sometimes, because my films are often about, you know, youth at risk, that oftentimes these people that I meet are actually living that life, which is quite complicated too. And it's gauging whether it's like would be a good experience for them to do something like this, or if it's even feasible to do it for like 5 weeks, like 10, 12 hours a day. So it's like, yeah, it's a big investment of testing that and getting to know the person, and it's emotional and complicated, and you go down all these rabbit holes, but ultimately I feel like with the work that I'm doing, it's really rewarding and it brings something really authentic and real. But I don't know, at the same time, I don't really differentiate too much between professional actors and non-professional actors. I'm just like, what human like captivates me. You know, I get captivated by certain actors, professional actors as well, and just kind of get obsessed. And yeah, there's a filmmaker, Lucretia Martel. She said something about like with actors, as a director, you have to like desire your actors, like not in a sexual way, but like that desire has to be there. Otherwise, like if that, you know, if you don't feel that, you're just not gonna want to watch them on screen. And so that is, I do have this thing where it feels like an obsession that I get with a person, and I just explore that. And I never cast anyone without, you know, putting them on camera first and trying things. But yeah, with Werewolf, the lead actor, Andrew Gillis, who plays Blaze, he was a good friend of mine, and also a good friend of the young man I spoke of earlier, Phil, who passed away. So after Phil passed away, Andrew and I would meet for coffee, like probably once a month, and we were trying to like process losing our friend. And over the course of that, without even saying it, I think we both just knew that he had to play the role. There was like, he knew the material really well and was close to Phil. So, and he was also a very creative person. But again, I was like, I don't know if he could do this. So I just did some tests with him and actually made a short film, 4 quarters, that he's in, and it worked well. So I didn't even audition anyone else for that role. It was just, I moved forward with casting him. And for the female lead, Nessa, I did that thing for probably 6 months where I had probably 5 people that I spent a lot of time with, did all these auditions with. And, you know, in auditions, sometimes it's just like, I'll be like, here's $5, let's walk to the store, buy whatever you want in the store. And I'm just going to watch you or you know, film you, where I would
like, follow them handheld walking down the street to the store. That's the audition. That's awesome.
Sometimes, or I would be like, here's the number for the hospital. They call and ask for this person, and just put them in real situations.
Because you improv a lot as well in your process.
I did in Werewolf, yeah. Or I would just be, just like I would want to see them buy something, and I would want to see them eat something, and just see them walk. But other times I would maybe use like a scripted scene. But yeah, so with Nessa, I was going down all these like rabbit holes with these young women who I got really close to and really invested in, but things got so complicated because their lives were very complicated, and it was getting close to shooting, and I hadn't made a choice yet. And then someone had told me about a young woman who was actually a theater actress, but had never been in film before. And so I just looked her up on Twitter, and I saw her picture, and I was just, I had that moment where I was like, yes, like her look is super interesting. So I just direct messaged her on Twitter and asked her to come audition, and then I cast her. And
you showed her a film for her to make the transition from theater, which tends to be a bigger kind of performance to the kind of understated thing you were going for, correct?
Yeah. I tried. Well, I sent her my film so she could get a sense of like the world and the tone and the scale of things, and I sent her some other films like a Dardenne brothers film, and just I sent a rosette out by the Dardenne brothers because like the lead character in that is just so subtle. Like the climax of the film is like when the corner of her mouth just like cracks a little bit into a smile, and so like that's very different than what she was used to, like musicals on stage kind of thing. So just as a reference point to prepare, showed her some things. Yeah.
Terril, I want to ask you about your process of visualization, because you create these really rich worlds. And one of the things I love is that sort of the villains in the school, and because you're going into a world where it's quite violent and it has to do with children, and all of that is such difficult emotional terrain, and yet the villains are all these school instruments. We even saw it in the trailer where they're snipping her hair. So can you talk about your process of visualization, of maybe imagining what things could be, and because sometimes you go into fantastical places.
Thank you. I read a really weird book when I was starting out, because my background is in visual art. I make all of my sets and my worlds and my dolls, and so I kind of approach film more as an artist than as a filmmaker. I've come into film. And what was it called? The Rebels Filmmaker Guide or something stupid. And I was really inspired by the first chapter. It said, you're not in LA. You don't have to act like that. You don't actually have to produce films that way. Find out what your gifts are as a filmmaker and utilize them. And I'm like a one-horse show. I do everything myself. I'm a bit of a control freak. And listening to Ashley directing like people and managing lives and stuff, it just terrifies me. And I'd like to get there someday to actually be able to have people implement my vision. But I mean, I'm at the point where I have to push them around myself or make them come to life to tell the stories that I want to tell. So I realized, because I do work alone, I was making all these storyboards and everything like a traditional animator. And I think, well, I'm the one that's going to actually ultimately work from the storyboard. And so I do actually do kind of rough out an idea. I do a beat sheet. I do a line of things that I kind of want to do. I know the gist of what the piece, but I leave a lot of room in for experimentation. When you work alone, you can do that. I'm judge and jury on set. I can decide what goes and what stays. And the way this works for me is that part of my process, I also do compositing and the special effects as well and edit it. So I just start assembling as I go. And I was a little embarrassed when I started and telling people about it, but Del Toro works the same way, so I don't feel so bad. So actually it is a technique that some people do use. So I like to kind of see how the film's taking shape, in particular the villains. I didn't actually have any villains, and the villains never share the same space as the children. And I wasn't really sure if I wanted to actually have them in there, because I didn't want the story to be about them. I wanted it to be just about the children's experience. And in the end, it was like, I like that comes out of experimentation, playing with the material. It occurred to me one day that the hardest thing for me are the labels that, or the the kind of the branding that came out of those experiences that kind of seeped deep into your skin. And that what if the villain are actually bits of typewriter that type and kind of embed their opinion of you, and that you no longer have your own opinion, but it's their opinion opposed on you. And I thought, I can get behind that shit. So suddenly now my villains were bits of typewriters who had that kind of control, which spoke more to that, like taking over the written word or history more so than just the violence. So, there was that duality through that process of experimentation that I was really, really excited about. So I always do it, but it is a leap of faith, because, I'm pushing around things until I'm inspired, and it doesn't always happen right away. So there's a period where I'm thinking, oh shit, I hope something, I hope this all comes together in the end, because I do believe that you need to be, I see long, but action painting, the art of having your hands in something, your intention is shown through the work that you're doing and your connection to it. And to me, going back to my first statement about the handbook, that's what I can bring to the medium. That's what I can bring to filmmaking, because I'm the whole process, that you can feel me, you can feel my fingerprints, you can feel me in the work. And I don't want to clean that up. Like, to me, that's really important.
And have you been through the process enough times that you feel like you can trust that moment when you're just drawing a blank and you're needing to get there and you're not? Okay.
No, it's still scary. I hope, and the films seem to work and do well in the end. But it's a very emotional process, the whole thing, because I'm always putting myself. Also, the dolls that I use, the sets that I use, everything changes. So every time I do a new production, I do things to kind of challenge myself and challenge that process, because I don't want to kind of comfortably sit on something that's working either. Oh, this worked last time, so let's just do this again, because I don't feel like you can feel my learning process or my process of creation in the work. It kind of becomes neutered, and I want you to feel, as I'm learning, you're learning with me, that you're feeling that. I mean, ultimately, that's what I aim for. I don't know if that's doing that, but there is that intention behind it.
Right. Thyrone, I have a question for you. So your character is very haunted by something that's happened in his past, and you never reveal what that is. And yet there's incredible tension and suspense throughout the whole thing. I wonder how you thought about, and I think the choice trusts the audience. I also think it's amazingly economical for a short film. It works really well. How do you make choices about how much information to leave in and what to leave out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a practical reason for that as well. I mean, we speak about. I don't know if I speak about it to give it away, but there's an incident that happens in his past, which is based on an incident that I had when I was younger, nearly drowning at Wildwater Kingdom when I was about like 8 or so, and so that's something that we put in there. But
that's an incredibly rich thing for a sailor in training as well, just to mention that.
Yeah, I'm gonna do water when I've drowned before, but or nearly drowned before, but I mean, there's the practical side of that was also, the issues that come up on set. I mean, for example, the child that is in the movie couldn't swim when he showed up to set, even though he was supposed to know how to swim. But things like this happen. So we had to shoot around the ability of this young boy to swim. But you're always trying to be as concise as possible, and the audience is always smarter than you are. You think that you're being like this masterful person and leading people in certain ways, but people, I mean, there's so much out there. People figure things out way before you do. So I feel like when you present the information that you want to, and you take it as far as you can. You shoot everything that you do on set, and you lay it all on the table. And then when you're in the edit, you just start removing pieces, and you go, all right, do we need that? Do we need that? I'm sure they could figure that out. And sometimes, the curse of that can be that people miss things, right? I mean, there's tons of times where people say, I didn't get that, or I didn't understand why that was there, and that's kind of a risk that you take. But I feel that movies work better when they're far more concise, and you take that risk of someone maybe not getting it, than to lay everything on the table, and then everyone's kind of just watching and going, okay, yeah, thanks, like you took away all the work for us, all the fun out of experiencing your movie. So I mean, that was a decision that definitely came partly of the practicality on set, and then also in the edit, and even when we even before we shoot it, I'm not very precious about the writing stage. Luckily, I've gotten over that a bit, and so even days before the shoot, we're going. And we're sitting there and we're going, do we need to shoot that? Should we have that? And cutting things, just constantly trying to strip everything down to the core, to the basics, so that when we present it to everyone, they're getting just the raw feel of what we were trying to go for, as opposed to any kind of like frills or frivolous things.
Great. And I would just want to ask you all who funded your films. So Thyrone, you can start, and then we'll go all the way down.
NBC Universal Canada and Ontario Arts Council. So the two of them did the funding for the film. And
what was the NBC thing? Was that an initiative, or is that a fund that exists out there?
Yeah, NBC Universal Canada has money that they spend on Canadian productions, a certain amount of money that they spend every year on Canadian productions. I think it was called a Heritage Grant. and they had supported Avalanche, which was the short film that I did before, and so there was a little bit of money there that I could. No, not a crap load. It wasn't like that. I think sometimes people hear NBC Universal and they're like, "Oh, you got a lot of money." It was like it was just pretty much the same amount that you would probably get from any other grant. But it was still a nice privilege to go in and be able to pitch for it and for them to present it and to trust that I wouldn't squander their money on something silly.
Toronto Arts Council and the Ontario Arts Council.
Yeah, ours was the film that we were trying to do that was it was supposed to be a Canadian and China co-production, and that just turned to be a real tough mess because the two cultures, they work so differently. So this film we purposely kept it very small so that it was it was all Chinese money, and then because we never done a film before, we ran out of money in the post-production, and so we had to rely on the residents of the greater British Columbia to give us the money for the rest of to finish the film. So
did you do crowdfunding?
No. I thought about it actually, but then it was it would have been such a effort, to put it and to put together a campaign. And I thought that, if I was going to, it was just like I was just going to beg for money from like relatives and friends and people that I know that have some money, and then just take loans and stuff like that. So I'd rather do that than to sort of put the pressure on, having like to please 1,000 or 100 something backers, and because I feel like that's a pressure I don't want to take. I'd rather like just take out the loan and then have to pay back, eventually, kind of thing.
Yeah, sure, great.
Werewolf was made through the Telefilm micro-budget program, and we had support from the Canada Council for the Arts Nova Scotia, and in Nova Scotia, the Tax Credit Incentive Fund. And yeah, it's kind of, I think the Telefilm micro-budget program is the only program that you can combine with Arts Council money, because normally the Arts Councils need you to maintain like full creative and editorial control and ownership of the work. And I think if in any other Telefilm program, you wouldn't have that. But with the micro budget, you do. So it's kind of interesting to be able to combine all three for us, provincial, federal, and Telefilm. But the stipulation is it's a micro budget film, so it can't be over $250,000.
And do any of you have any grant writing advice?
I've never done it, but I feel like it's probably the same as pitching. But it's just like know your audience, like know what they actually want, and then try to guide the your sort of your pitch or your grant process towards that way. I feel there's only a few things that the investors ever want, like prestige, money, like that kind of stuff. Anyways.
Well, with grants, usually, except for I don't know how it works with Telefilm, but if it's an Arts Council grant, it's going to be like peer reviewed, so the jury's going to be like other filmmakers. And so my advice would be, if you haven't written a grant before, is like talk to a friend or a mentor or someone who has and be like, can I see your application? Or for me, a huge thing was actually getting on the juries, so you can read everyone's application and just learn from what they've done. And yeah, I think it's good just to be really clear and just to speak to anything that you might think like, oh, I've never, my work has only been in a few film festivals. I need to try to make it look like I was in this or that. It's better just to speak to any challenges or gaps you feel like you might have in your project or in your background. Just speak to it and sort of, yeah. Don't leave any question marks, because it's like, I think when you're on a jury, it's hard to kind of differentiate between things, and it's easier if someone just doesn't address some big thing or just leaves some gap. It's easier to eliminate a project based on things that were left unsaid rather than like just 5 applications that are all strong and it's hard to choose between them. Then yeah, you'd sort of eliminate the one that maybe doesn't speak to something about the budget or something like that.
I agree. I just want to I've been on a few juries too, and sometimes the applications are more like a pitch to a cause. And the cause might be great, but that's not what you're assessing. That's not the assessment criteria. What I tell students is have an idea, but keep it kind of open, and then read the criteria, and then become what they're looking for. But you have to follow through. So a lot of good ideas and good films and good pitches, it might not be the right place to get the funding. There might be other venues or avenues. The reason I don't know, I keep wanting to say this. The reason I go to Arts Council funding and not other places for funding is that I have the most freedom, especially because my work can be a little bit political. I do have creative control of the work and my voice when I get Arts Council funding.
Great. So the question is to all of you, who is the most important collaborator on your films and why? Sorry, sorry if it's difficult to make you pick just one. Tyrone?
Yeah. Sorry. Just to add to that last thing about the grants thing. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes, writing grants is great, but sometimes it's good to just like put yourself out there. When I did Avalanche, the movie before, going back to the NBC Universal thing, the reason that happened is because I tried to do a Kickstarter, which I will never do again. But I tried to do a Kickstarter. But the blessing in that was I worked with big brothers and sisters. I used to be a little brother myself, and I asked them to put their Kickstarter up on their site. And when they did so, John Maluso, who's the managing director over at Universal, he happened to have been a big brother, and he saw that. And then he reached out to me and said, "Hey, your little brother, I'm a big brother. Let's meet up. Let's speak about that." And so by doing that, by just like putting yourself out there, it led me in that direction to meet those people who I ended up pitching for Avalanche and pitching on this story. So sometimes, grants are good, but one of the things I would say, Ontario Arts Council is the first grant I ever got outside of the Universal stuff.
But you've made how many films before this one?
3 before this one.
3.
Yeah,
okay.
3 shorts. But yeah, so I would just say, put yourself out there as well. Don't always just wait for the grants, and go for them, but also know that there's also other avenues that you could take to make your film. And sometimes just setting a date and saying, I'm going to make a film on this date can get you someplace sometimes. But as far as as a collaborative, it's really hard because everybody, I feel, from the actors, them trusting the vision and me saying, don't worry, there's going to be a sound effect here, and them going, okay, and trusting that that's going to happen. Right off the top of my head, I think music, the sound and the music in my films are really big. So I think of my composer, Erica, and Pino over at Post City, who does the sound. I feel like my relationship with them is probably...
You don't have to pick a favorite. You can just hone in on one.
No, but like... well, they've both been with me for the last 2, and I we were talking about trust before, and I had to put a lot of trust in them because I have this sound... it's really hard for I can't play the instruments or anything like that, and trying to get them to replicate the feeling and the sounds that you want to hear, and them trusting that and creating that for the films and putting a little bit of themselves in. It really is a very personal and sometimes really messy relationship that we have. But we've done it twice and it's worked, I guess. So I would say they're probably the ones that really stand out.
Now I want to say my sound guys because it's like, which guys win? No, actually, Jason Ryle, he's in the audience. He created the storyteller screenings, and he really got me thinking about the idea of what our histories are, and to give honor to our oral stories, and what all that looks like. I guess you always come up with great curatorial ideas for things and get me thinking. And since then we've become friends, and he was brought onto the project as a producer, and I learn from all the time. Just had coffee, and I'm learning more and more all the time from Jason.
Yeah, I have this this quasi kind of psychic uncle that like if I just sit in front of him for like a little longer, he would just offer up advice, for no reason. So he told me that I need two people to make my film. One is someone who's really close to me, who's just taking care of the everyday stuff. And I had 4 producers, that did that for me. And then somebody who is much more, let's say, established, who could, like, the way he put it was to block the wind, and pave the road kind of thing. And we did have that, which was the person, like I didn't have to juggle balls for investors anymore. And we just, have this. Like this executive producer who came in and sat in front of these investors and just basically like said a couple words and said, it's not even that much money. It's like that kind of thing. And then I got the money. So
magic.
Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah. For me, I've been working with the same producer since high school, or we've known one another since high school, and I've worked together for a long time. So I think that partnership to me is definitely the most important working relationship I have. And, I live on an island where there's no film industry, and I'm one of 3 filmmakers, the other one being him and then a friend of ours. So it can be really, I don't know if I would have been able to embark on making films if it was just by myself. Like there's something that just having that other person who's doing it with you that made me feel like I could do it at all. And so I think that's the most important relationship. That's Nelson McDonald, my producer. But I would say during the actual shooting of Werewolf, the most important collaboration definitely felt like my cinematographer, Scott Moore, because it was a really, really small crew. And, we had 2 cars. Like Nelson was in one car with our sound person and all the sound gear, and Scott and I had a car with all the camera gear. So it's like every morning Scott would pick me up. We would load all the gear. We would go to set and just... We were changing things all the time, so it would really only be me and Scott who would know what was going to happen on the day and what we were going to shoot, and we would just figure everything out together and then unload the car every night. And he also was, we didn't have a camera team, so he was cinematographer, the focus puller, the grip, and the gaffer. And at times I felt like he was the first AD and all these things. And we also shot 2 cameras and only had 1 camera operator. So he was just like in it and lived and breathed everything with me. It's the sort of thing where your minds sort of fuse and you're just like a unit, and like you go get food and you just hand them food or water and you don't even it's just like you're just surviving together. And it felt like, yeah, for sure the most important relationship on the film.
So we're going to open it up to the audience very shortly, but I have one other question that I want to shoot out to you all, which is there's been a lot of talk recently in the industry about diversity, and that the industry is still dominated overwhelmingly by voices that are white and male. And since no one on the stage represents that demographic, I wanted to ask you if choosing to portray, say, underrepresented communities on screen adds any pressure for you as an artist. And Johnny, I'll maybe start with you, because I read that you had been worried that because you were making a negative film and that it was a film about China, and given the political climate between, the way China might be viewed in our current era, that was something that you were worried about. Do any of you think about that?
Sorry, I'm a little... So...
Because it's the idea that if you're putting an underrepresented community on screen that is not there very often, is it more politically charged? Are there more pressures that you feel personally? And I know that you had said you were worried about making a negative film about China.
Yeah, I mean, I for that reason, I was just worried that the conversation wouldn't be... would be muddied because of where I was making the film, and so it was only that. Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is this, there's a lot of people who are making films overseas that don't come from that, that community, and sometimes it could feel forced and a little fake, and the worst possible way would be poverty porn, in that way. And so I was very concerned about that. Yeah, to represent a story that is so charged in a way that's not real, honest, I would say. So I would just say, so I try to work. The only way I can combat that is just work harder than anybody else. Let's say a local filmmaker would, So to just educate myself about sort of what's actually happening and sort of hear all the stories and try to do it as honestly as possible. That's the only way I feel to and just not to think about that part of it. But yeah, that's it for sure. But when you mentioned it, I feel like there's a certain reason why I decided to make a film in overseas rather than in North America, because it is kind of weird. I was on a panel and they got the money to make a film about. I don't know if this reveals the film too much, but it was like an icon that does karate. So there's only a few of them, but it was they got the money, and the lead character wasn't Bruce Lee or damn it. Anyway, so it was. Yeah. Anyway, it was a really a crazy thing, and I even find myself, because I'm reading this book about sort of the rise of the sort of Vietnamese gangs in New York, and I remember thinking, I was like, man, I'm never going to get this financed, but there's a character in there that maybe we could get a Hollywood that would help, and I'm like, and I catch myself in that way, but I'm just like, man, there's something not quite right if we're thinking that way, So I do feel that there is. Everybody who's in North America who's trying to make films, for this market, that's a big pressure. And the fact that if you're making a foreign language film and you're trying to get into the North American market, that's it. You can't break it. It's literally zero, unless you win Cannes or something like that. It's just. It's like a non-English language film in this market is really, really tough to sustain.
Anyone else want to take this one?
I feel like, if you're dealing with a pressure like that, it's just important at what point in the creative process you consider it. Because I feel like early on in my creative process, I want to a sort of pretty unmediated experience. I just want to trust the things that are inspiring me and just explore it without second guessing myself all the time and doubting things. Because if I start thinking about, oh, how am I representing this character or that, then I feel like I would just be paralyzed and probably not make it. I would just be like, oh, I can't. It's just too much pressure. But at a certain point, I think with Werewolf for sure, I remember looking at the script and hearing so much about the representation of women on screen and how male characters always get the good lines and this sort of thing. And I looked at my script, I was like, oh my God, I did that. Blaze is talking all the time. He takes up all this room and Nessa's not. And I was starting to get really freaked out about that. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll switch the gender roles and all this sort of stuff. But then I was like, I can't. This is just real. This is based on, all this stuff came from a real place, and it's really. But at a certain point, I was questioning. I was like, "Am I just ideologically indoctrinated by am I just reproducing this patriarchal kind of dominant thing, or is this true and real to my experience?" And ultimately, I was like, "No, this is a really honest representation of what I was trying to do." So I just trusted that, but I feel like if I was thinking of that too early, I probably would have just squashed the project and not done it. But I think also that now, though, because I had that feeling and that added pressure and anxiety the whole time, I think that's going to affect what I do next. Now I left Werewolf feeling like my next project, I want it to be about two women, or the woman has to be the focus, and I do want her to speak more. And so I guess maybe that's how I deal with it. I know Claire Denis said something like the frustrations from one project give birth to the next, and that's what it feels like right now. So,
right. Go ahead.
I'm part of a greater conversation. There's a bunch of Indigenous people making films, and I feel like I don't have to shoulder all of it, and I think that takes a lot of pressure off. I have my one opinion and my one voice, and that's what I speak to. And it's amazing. There was a panel, protocols and pathways, that was done, and it's just having respect when bringing these stories to screen, because I think we're always fighting against the predetermined Hollywood Indian. So I think any Indigenous voice making a film, bringing it to screen that isn't that, I think is a great thing. So it's definitely embedded in my work.
As a Black filmmaker, I don't feel really too much pressure in that area. I mean, the one thing I don't want to do is make another Hood movie. I mean, there's people that do that and do it better than I do. I think really what's important for me is to show young Black men doing things that people don't see them doing, and being in spaces where we exist, but we're not shown to exist. I think that is more important to me. And when writing the character for my movie, that wasn't even the most difficult part. I think the actual most difficult part was writing Hannah's character, who is a woman, one of his classmates. Because the movies are short and we spend a lot of time with Nate and in his mind and in his space, we don't really get to explore the people that are around him. And when she does show up, she shows up, I think, 2 or 3 times in the movie, and it's always around him and other men. And I really, and that to me was the most challenging part, was making sure that that I represented the women in my film properly. That the women I went to school with were take no prisoners, kick ass sailor, and I didn't want them to just be love interests or just to serve that sort of purpose. So that was something that I found was the hardest, was how do I in 2 minutes make sure that we're still telling the story, and yet that the women that we're seeing who these women are, against a lot of the hormones and male aggression that we, not so much aggression, but the installation of in a lead male's character that we see throughout the film.
Great. So I'm going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. Yes, right in the middle. So please wait for the microphone.
Hi. So what I can see from these films is that they all seem to be very intensely personal stories. So did you have any difficulty bringing those to the public, or was it more of a sense of relief to finally make it?
I mean, once you went to roll the camera, then that was gone. That whole personal thing was gone. It was like, we're doing this. We're out here. There's 30 people here. They've all read my story. They know what's happening. So once we got to the set, then the personal part of it was gone. It was like, all right, how do we make the best movie and tell this character's story? And I become a bit more objective at that point.
Does anyone else think about that?
It is a really intense story, and ironically, my marriage was falling apart at the time I was animating, and it was like horrible, and I, there was a lot of intensity generally with my mood as all this was going down. So I think it does leak into the work.
Yeah, I think that anytime you put yourself into a film, not necessarily just the character, but when you're making a film, especially like a debut feature, it's very scary, and I think that I remember like being very scared in the first time we ever showed it in Berlin, and I was shaking, and and then they let me sit in the aisle and showed me a button where, like, in case because I was really worried about the sound. We sent it to Berlin. I didn't get to tech check it, and so they told me a button can change the sound in the auditorium. I think they were lying to me, but like it was just like, and I always feel like I experienced it a few times with on this particular film and on my short film as well. It's when the screen goes down and then there's a certain emotion that goes through the audience. I always enjoy just sitting off to the side because that's when you feel like you could feel if you just put your hand into the into the audience, you could feel the wave of emotion going through it, and that's kind of always an intense sort of experience. So.
I find like actually releasing the film and having people watch it, I'm okay with that. I think it's when I need to talk about the film, like when I had to do press or even answering the question, what's our personal connection to the work, or even answering your questions right now. In my mind, I'm like, what can I say? What can't I say? What's right for this environment right now? What's right for, like, if you come and ask me that later one-on-one, I'll probably tell you more. Like, it's that whole, because I feel like talking is my thing. That's why I make movies, is because I can't read the words. Yeah, I can't really find words to talk about things. So yeah, I found making something that is really personal. Yeah, I've been so conflicted, like, and it being my first feature too, I'm doing more press than I've ever done, and that's when it's like, okay, what can I say? Because this is gonna exist in the world, you know, or online for maybe a long time. Maybe no one's reading it. I don't know, but I found it really stressful, and not knowing what's too much information and what's not, and just wanting to be honest and vulnerable, and at the same time just knowing what do people really want to hear and what's appropriate for what setting.
Question?
Hi, my question's for Terril, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable because I know he was involved with your film, but if you're willing, I would love to hear your thoughts on the sort of Joseph Boyden controversy that's going on right now, especially in regards to what was discussed at the keynote this morning about who has a sort of right to tell whose stories and what stories.
Are you comfortable speaking to the Joseph Boyden controversy, Terril?
No, but I'm not comfortable. I'm very uncomfortable. We talked a lot about it, and I'm not going to personally comment about directly if is he or isn't he. I don't know. I really don't know. Does it impact this work? Yeah, I think it does. I think it opens up a different kind of a dialogue about this piece for sure, especially when this piece addresses that direct issue. I think it's a dialogue that was coming. It's taken me days, and I'm not even done thinking about how I feel about any of this stuff. But I think I'm here for the conversation. You know, I'm here to figure it out with everybody. You know.
Thank you.
Questions? Yeah, at the back. Please wait for the mic.
All right, so I might just be speaking for myself, but I mean, like, there's other people like here that are also into film, and if you could give like one piece of important advice for someone who wants to get into filmmaking and stuff, what would you give them?
Can I start? Oh, I'm going to start. I teach kids, and I think that ultimately, I didn't know, I was embarrassed about who I was for like a long time, and I've come into saying, you know what, whatever I am, this is awesome, and I'm going to figure this shit out, and I do it through film. And I think the story that we have inside of us are authentic. I think that's what we know most about. And I think, like, all the kids that I've met, beautiful stories come out of them, things I've never known. It's like a film is, you're walking through somebody else's world. It's not like you're telling somebody about somebody's world. You're actually bringing them through it. And what better than a person that knows that world?
I guess, yeah, something that really culminated, I would say, for my producer and I with Werewolf, a certain learning, I guess, that we had was that, you know, there's many different ways to make a film, like, outside of just the industry way that you're taught. And I think we sort of felt like our first film was made through this training program where it was about, this is how you make a film the industry way. And I think we've been trying to unlearn that. But I mean, it was important to get started in making films, but we just realized that that model didn't really work for us because we're, you know, where we live and the kind of stories we're trying to tell, just, they don't really fit. We're not in Hollywood, you know, we're in Cape Breton, and trying to transplant that to that place just, I think, almost suffocated the good thing that we can get from actually being there and shooting a film there. So we kind of were really let's try to play by our own rules. Let's make up our own rules and just subscribe to that. And I remember there's this Malcolm Gladwell New Yorker piece called How David Beats Goliath. And we just talk about that all the time. And it is basically about sort of playing by your own rules. And like he talks about, there was this teenage girl basketball team in the States that all the players were super unskilled, and they ended up winning the championship in this league. And the way they did it was instead of just playing by the typical basketball rules, they decided to the coach decided let's full court press the entire game and play zone defense as well. So then they would win games 6-0 just because the other team, who was super skilled and had all the top players, they just couldn't even get the ball in bounds. But that idea of just no, let's not play by the typical rules because we'll lose, And I think about that, about people trying to make Hollywood films without the resources or without the stars. It's if you do that, we're just gonna lose and no one's gonna see them and the movies are gonna suck. So just abandon all that and just do something that feels really honest to where you're at and what you're trying to say. And I think that's what's going to harness what you have to offer as a filmmaker. So yeah, that's something that we thought about a lot making Werewolf.
Yeah, and I think communities is very important. Creating your own community or getting involved in the sort of the film community. Because I've had sort of young students come up and they're like, "Oh, I want to make a short film. Can you tell me how that can happen? How did you get your DP? How did you get your producer?" And I was thinking, I was like, "How did I do it?" And I remember thinking well, first of all, I didn't have money to pay them. And in the very beginning, I when I couldn't even get actors in New York to come and read for me because I had nothing, of my past work. So I had to, say that I'm just going to put an adaptation of Samuel Beckett and things like that to attract sort of good actors to come in and read for me. And I remember, and I think that in order to get people to work on my film, I had to work on 10 other films before, to just offer my free time and sort of, and I think that was sort of my way of getting into it. So I always felt that, if you want to get involved in the film community, it's very easy because everybody needs, free labor or cheap labor on sort of independent feature films. And that is the way you can sort of pay it forward, because I think that, I didn't think that I was that I would have an audience to watch my films. I just wanted to be a part of, hopefully a film that was going to be as good as Raging Bull. I would be a gaffer if that was something that I could be a part of, and I'm very lucky that people give me chances to make my own film. Yeah.
As far as if you're being a director or being a filmmaker itself, don't wait for permission to do things, just, especially today with the resources that we have, is go out and make things, shoot things. You don't necessarily always have to put them out there if you don't feel super comfortable about it, but it's getting the reps in. There's only so much you can learn in a classroom or, watching movies, which are all important, but, you learn when you shoot stuff. This is one of those things where you have to be on set in order to get better at it or to learn the craft. And then also, I don't know if for you personally or for anybody who just wanting to be a director, they just want to be in the film industry, work on sets and figure out, what you want to contribute to the actual making of a film. Because, with the exception of Terril's film, which is 90% her, if you look at the credits, I'm sure, of all of our movies, you'll see a crap load of names of people, right? From producers to cinematographers. And these are all people that found their way of sharing their stories and putting their imprint on the stories that I'm trying to tell or that Johnny's trying to, or that anyone's trying to tell. One of the proudest things I got to do is produce for, my friends, is produce their films and see their voices and their visions come out. That to me is also just as pleasing as when I do my own films, So finding what it is that you want to do and contribute to the process, I think, is just as important as well.
More questions? Yep.
So I believe filmmaking is also a lot about problem solving, because from the storyboard to the end product, things change along the post-production and the shooting. So I was wondering, what is one of the problems that you encountered on set, and how did you troubleshoot it?
Who wants to take that one first?
Well,
problems on set.
There was a kid that couldn't swim. We had that. So that was a problem. How did we get around that? We just shot other stuff. We were there. Yeah, you got. I mean, you just have to like think on your feet. I mean, with that situation, you just can't panic whenever you're on set. You know, things. You have to get in this mindset going. I know it sounds horrible, but it's almost like you have to go to work thinking something could go wrong, like shit could hit the fan. You know, and just thinking about that, and then going, okay, like you can't prepare because you have no idea what it's going to be. But once you get there, like, you know, you could have that one moment of screaming anger, but then you have to immediately go, okay, what can we do? You know, what is the new situation? And just try to adapt yourself to that and be flexible to it, and listen to your teammates. You know, your cinematographer. A lot of times, like, people are sitting around, they have ideas about things, but they don't say it because, you know, you're the director, you're in charge. But that's, you know, the greatest thing that you could do sometimes is just look over to your cinematographer, look over to your AD or anybody, and be like, "What do you think?" You know, because they might have this idea that might be crazy, but it's like that's what we could do. We should do that. You know, let's go in that direction, and sometimes they save the day. You know. So.
Yeah, problems on set to me are just they're opportunities for creativity, because I mean I don't know if you have noticed sort of these bigger budget sort of films of, you know, so who used to be filmmakers who used to be really like, you know, raw, and now they have all the opportunities, all the resources to make their film, and somehow it doesn't feel as you know, immediate and exciting anymore. And I always feel that you know, whenever you have, you know, people question sort of, you know, what you want to do, those are always great for opportunities just to kind of either reconfirm sort of your ideas or to find a better way. And I always feel, I just love like when something happens and, you know, you lose a location, you lose something, and somebody can't say this or that, and immediately you have to make a decision right away. And 99% of the time, that's always the best decision. Where like just because your instinct, your survival instinct, sort of kicks in as filmmakers, and that's when you're really kind of dancing, you know, a little bit, and then everybody else is sort of dancing with you, and it just feels you almost feel like you're part, like that's when the whole collaborative effort becomes really alive, you know. So I really welcome that, actually.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if you can position yourself to be able to respond to problems, like whether it's you have more shooting time or your team is smaller, or it doesn't even have to be small, but agile enough that you feel like you can take a moment to step back, or take a moment to turn to someone who, like, sometimes I think as a director you're just like, you're a tunnel vision, like literally staring at the frame, whereas like the person 10 feet behind you can see the answer to the problem because they're literally just 10 feet behind you. And you know, so you just have to ask them for sure. And like with Werewolf, I think we totally did leave ourselves open to anything, to changing anything in any moment, and that I think is what a lot of what you see in the film is stuff that wasn't scripted and was us responding to things that were happening on set and changes that were happening. And we would just you know, go into a location and just meet someone in that location, and we had maybe cast someone in a role already or didn't even have a role written, but just meet someone and just put them in the film, and they ended up being amazing. So then we'd rewrite and just doing a lot of stuff like that. I think maybe the biggest problem is just like if you're shooting and things don't feel alive and real and you're not excited, like my friend, a filmmaker friend of mine, is really into the Safdie brothers, and he was saying the other day that they said if you're shooting and your heart isn't racing, then you know you're not doing the right thing. Like you're not getting anything good if your heart's not racing. So I don't know. I think that turning problems into opportunities is like, if you can position yourself to do that, I think that's like the best approach.
And actually, there was one of my favorite things to do is sort of talk to sort of filmmakers that have made films that you just think are just perfect, and then you find out that like nothing is perfect. I remember like talking to this actor, and he was telling me about this film that I loved. It was called like Blind Shaft. It was just an incredible film. And then they said, yeah, you know, we were shooting in these mines, and the first day we were filming inside a mine, you know, like everybody was falling apart because, you know, there was no air down there. So everybody came out of the mines, and then 30 minutes later, that mine collapsed, you know, and so that was the first day of filming. So then every day, everything was just going wrong and wrong and wrong. And the director basically shriveled into this ball, you know, and he just couldn't make decisions anymore. And that's when like the AD, the actors, they all stepped up, you know, that's where like a real sort of collaboration, because the director can't, you know, put everything on their shoulder. And, you know, those are the moments when, I mean, like a real masterpiece sort of come forward, you know, and the actors, you know, every day they're sitting on the back of a truck sort of talking about their dialogues with the AD, sort of coming up with their own things. And I think the best thing the director can do is just when you see magic happening, just let it happen rather than trying to, you know, control everything again, kind of thing.
Yeah, at a certain point, I feel like a film takes on a life of its own, and there's like this inner logic that you just have to just step back and just like let it happen.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question very briefly. Yes, in the middle.
It's me again. Hi. Do you have any advice on the creative block? Like when you know you have a story inside of you that you need to tell, but you don't know what it is or how to get it out or what to do about it?
The creative block, but I'm going to try to encourage everyone to answer that as quickly as they can. Thank you.
I go to the art gallery. I'll walk around the art gallery. Love it.
There's a thing called ayahuasca that I heard is really good.
I think creativity is more of like a marathon running thing than just like waiting for it to show up. So just do, like, if it's like writing, like just write every day, even if it's bullshit. Like 4 of those days, one of those days will be good, and you could use that stuff. But you have to just do it every single day.
Yeah, I think I'm with Terril. Like I'll put myself in a liminal space. Like I'll often go see movies and I won't watch the movie, but I just want to be in like out of my everyday life, just be in a dark room, and I find it really opens my mind. But then also I tend to just make whatever really is like coming out of me. So if there's a block, I would say I would probably just leave that thing alone and do another thing, and maybe in 5 years it'll all resolve itself. I don't know. Maybe that's terrible advice.
Breaking routines is always kind of, you know, like doing something physical to kind of just get your mind off that immediate task, and then you always find that like something just simpler and quicker solution are always there, you know, kind of thing.
I used to find in school boring lectures because I couldn't actually pay attention. I'm very dyslexic, so I couldn't actually pay attention, and so my best ideas came through a lecture, even if I didn't have to be there.
Oh, wait, turn off the internet in your house.
Those are great advice, everybody. Thank you so much for the panelists. Thyrone and Terril's shorts are playing in Short Program 2. Old Stone and Werewolf are playing twice during TIFF Top 10. Please check them out. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.